One night, Mike was spending a quiet evening at home. Suddenly, he heard a knocking, scratching at the door. He looked down at his watch. It was almost midnight. He wondered, who could be at the door this time of night? Mike had been a detective for more than 20 years, so all his senses were instantly alerted to possible danger. As he walked towards the door and pulled it open, he noticed a small pool of something crimson on the doorstep that looked like blood, but he couldn't be sure. He immediately pulled his gun, thinking there might be a burglar or someone trying to get in. Took several more steps, and he noticed that the puddle on his doorstep began to shimmer and glow. He took several steps back and strongly resisted the urge to run. As he watched the glow from the blood, or at least that's what it looked like, began to slowly creep upward, coalescing into the shape of something gnarled and twisted, a figure with long claws and eyes that glowed like they were on fire. Mike was frozen to the spot as the figure moved toward him, and he began to feel the world spinning and his vision blurred. Mike's world contracted to the size of a pinprick. The figure, a grotesque mockery of humanity, continued to grow from the crimson canvas of his doorstep. Its form was elongated, skeletal, with claws that seemed to writhe and pulse with an unnatural life. The eyes, twin spears of molten gold, burned into him with a malevolent intensity. A cold sweat broke out on Mike's brow. His mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but logic was a frail reed against his tempest of the uncanny. He'd seen things in his line of work that would curdle the blood of lesser men, but nothing like this. Nothing that defied the laws of nature so blatantly. His fingers tightened on the trigger, a desperate anchor in a world gone mad. But the gun felt weightless in his hand, a child's toy against this cosmic horror. He was, after all, a detective, a man who dealt in facts, evidence, and cold, hard logic. Yet here he was, facing something that belonged in the realm of myth and nightmare. The figure was almost fully formed now, its skeletal hands outstretched, the claws seeming to elongate with each passing moment. A low, guttural growl, like the grinding of stone on stone, emanated from its distorted form. Mike's vision began to blur at the edges, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He felt himself slipping, falling into a dark abyss. The last thing he saw was the figure's face, a grotesque grinning mask of pure evil, before darkness consumed him. When consciousness returned, Mike found himself on the cold, hard floor of his living room. His body ached as if he'd been run over by a truck. His head throbbed with a relentless intensity, and a metallic taste filled his mouth. He tried to sit up, but a long, sharp pain shot through his side. He looked down and saw a gaping wound, still oozing dark blood. Instantly, panic seized him. He was alone, badly injured in a house that had been the site of something utterly beyond comprehension. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers trembling. He needed help, but who would believe him? The police would think he was crazy, or worse, that he'd done this to himself. He managed to dial 911, his voice a hoarse whisper. As he waited for the operator to answer, he looked shakily around the room. The blood on his doorstep was gone. The door was intact. There was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of anything out of the ordinary. It was as if his mind had played a cruel trick on him. But the wound on his side was real enough, and so was the fear that gnawed at him from the inside. He knew what he had seen. He knew it was real, and he knew that whatever it wasn't finished with him. The police arrived quickly, the skepticism evident in their eyes. They examined the scene, found no evidence of forced entry, and concluded that Mike had probably injured himself in a fall. The wound was treated, and Mike was advised to take it easy. Alone in his house again, Mike felt a cold sense of dread creeping over him. He knew that what he had seen was only the beginning. The creature, whatever it was, had marked him, and it would be back. He spent the following days in a state of paranoia. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking menace. Every noise made his heart pound. He slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of the monstrous figure. And then one night, as he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, he heard a faint scratching sound coming from the attic. His blood ran cold. He grabbed a baseball bat and crept up the stairs, his heart pounding in his ears. The attic was dark, filled with shadows that danced and twisted in the dim light. He switched on the light and gasp escaped his lips. There, in the corner of the attic, was a dark stain on the floor, and in the center of the stain, a single perfect footprint. The same footprint as the one he had seen outside his door. A chill ran down Mike's spine. He was not alone. Whatever had visited him that night was still in his house, and it was getting closer. The following days were a blur of fear and paranoia. He tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the terror gnawing at him was a constant companion. He avoided going out, afraid of what might be lurking outside his door. He slept with the lights on, a baseball bat within easy reach. One evening, as he was watching television, the power flickered and died. The house was plunged into darkness. A cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He reached quickly for the baseball bat, his grip tight. Then he heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the walls. It was as something was trying to get in. His heart pounded in his chest. He was trapped, alone in the dark of whatever evil lurked in the shadows. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the walls, from all around him. He could feel the house creaking and groaning as if under immense pressure. Then a blood-curdling scream echoed through the house, a sound that chilled him to the bone. It was his own scream, and as the echoes of his scream faded, a cold, heavy presence filled the room. The darkness seemed to thicken, to press in on him from all sides. He could feel eyes on him, cold and malevolent. A rancid odor filled his nostrils, the stench of decay and something far more sinister. Then, just as he feared, a shape emerged from the darkness. It was a creature, larger now and more terrifying. Its eyes, twin beacons of internal light, seemed to pierce the darkness. Its claws, elongated and razor-sharp, glinted in the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. Mike swung the baseball bat with all his might, but the creature was too quick. It dodged the blow with an unnatural ease and lunged. Mike felt a searing pain in his arm as the creature's claws raked across his flesh. He stumbled backward, his grip on the bat loosening. The creature was upon him before he knew it, its breath hot and fetid on his face. Mike could feel its rancid breath, the stench of decay, and something far more sinister. Its claws dug into his flesh, and he screamed in agony. As consciousness slipped away, Mike saw the creature's face, a mask of pure, unadulterated evil, and then darkness. When he awoke, he was in a hospital bed. The room was white, sterile, and devoid of any life. A monitor beeped rhythmically, the only sound in the room. He tried to move, but his body felt heavy, like lead. Pain shot through his arm. He winced in pain, a constant reminder of the night's terror. He looked down at his arm, and a wave of nausea washed over him. It was bandaged heavily, and there were tubes running into his veins. A nurse entered the room, her face a mask of professional concern. "Hello, how are you feeling, Mr. Harris?" she asked, her voice soft. Mike tried to speak. His throat was dry. He managed to croak. What happened?" The nurse hesitated, her expression turning grave. "You were found unconscious in your home. You suffered severe injuries." Mike nodded, trying to process the information. He remembered the creature, the terror, the pain, but it was as if it had happened to someone else. "Do you remember anything about what happened?" the nurse asked. Mike shook his head. His mind was a blank. He tried to remember the creature, but his memory was hazy, like a fog-shrouded landscape. As the days turned into weeks, Mike slowly recovered. The physical wounds healed, but the mental scars remained. He had nightmares, constant, terrifying visions of the creature. He would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat. The police had found no evidence of a break-in or any signs of a struggle. The blood on his doorstep and the footprint in the attic had vanished without a trace. It was as if the entire ordeal had been a figment of his imagination. But Mike knew better. He knew what he had seen. He knew that evil was real, and he knew that it was still out there, waiting and watching. He left the city and moved to a small town, hoping to escape the creature's shadow. But the fear was always with him, a constant companion. He lived in a state of constant vigilance, always looking over his shoulder, always expecting the worst. Years passed, and slowly the memories began to fade. The creature became a distant nightmare, a shadow in the corners of his mind. But sometimes, on dark, quiet nights, he would wake up with a start, his heart pounding in his chest, and he would listen intently, straining to hear any sound, any sign of the thing that had turned his dreams upside down. And in those moments of fear and uncertainty, he knew that the nightmare was not over for him. It was merely waiting, biding its time until the day it could return and finish what he had started. For Mike Harris, the horror was not a story. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was coming back.